We are talking on this panel on the future of Europe. If you had the hope that the issue is becoming less complex over the day, this is disappointing. But with this excellent panel, I think we solve all these problems. On the positive note, we just heard Mr. Koopmans on the enlargement, and that will be the focus we are focusing on. And it's I admired Mr. Koopmans in presenting it so smoothly, and we will figure out that things are much more bumpy on the road. So if it comes to enlargement, which is by far not an actual topic, it has been, the EU has been dealing with that for many, many years, but there are essentially two questions Mr. Koopmans already mentioned. The one is, is the country or are the countries in concern ready to enter the European Union? And you know, the European Union is a rule-based setup. We have, Mr. Koopmans also mentioned that, the rule of law, the acquis communautaire, and the Copenhagen criteria that needs to be met that the doors to the European Union will open. That's one side. The other side, also has been mentioned, is the EU ready? Because it's sometimes you have the feeling that the EU or member states are afraid to be overloaded. Can we cope with additional members? Mr. Koopmans was so optimistic to say that we can only become stronger by getting bigger. Okay, we will see. And we start with the first aspect. So from a point of view of the new members or hopeful members, and I will ask Donika Emini to answer this question. You are an academic, and but that's not the only thing. You are director of Civic Platform, a secretariat of 250 SEOs in Kosovo, and you are member of the Balkans in Europe Policy Advisory Group. So are the Western Balkans ready to join?
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It's really, really good. I mean, thanks, Péter, for this, because it's amazing to have this sort of discussions organized here in Hungary, knowing that it is not the easiest country to deal with when it comes to democratization, but it is slightly easier when it comes to enlargement, which brings me to my first point. First of all, when I talk about enlargement, you have to understand that I'm not talking about democratization anymore, because enlargement and democratization are not hand in hand. I mean, back in the days, the EU instrument was, let's enlarge. This is our instrument, and this is how we democratize the world, right? The third wave of democratization. But it's not the case anymore, because the EU has been moving, and lately, rapidly, from what we know, the EU of values, to a pragmatic EU which wants to play geopolitical games. And obviously, this is hindering, because the EU's role itself, because it feels like the normative power that the EU had back in the days, it's lost, and the EU doesn't want even to search for it or find it. So the first problem that we have when it comes to the EU is first that it is becoming rather geopolitical, in which countries are not assessed based on their democratization level. They are based on geopolitical aspects, and in this case, we will see Serbia, for instance, as a country in the Western Balkans. That is country, for instance, if you look at the EU enlargement pattern, you see that Serbia is progressing, right? They are even, that is, you know, basically the EU stance. They are preparing to even close chapters on economic aspects of Serbia. That's because enlargement is not about values anymore. It's about being geopolitical. It's about playing the proxy war, for instance, in relation to China, or in relation to Russia, but not necessarily about values itself. So this is the point number one. The second point is that what is enlargement? Because if we hear about enlargement, we are hearing about economic cooperation, we are hearing about growth plan, but we are not hearing anymore about democracy. We're not hearing about reforms anymore. So this enlargement process is becoming a German model of enlargement in which we focus mainly on economic cooperation because that is basically what we want from the new countries. We don't want full political integration. We don't want, you know, to exercise our transformation power. We just want to become pragmatic and cooperate with these countries. And lately, I think what is appalling, especially for us in the region, is the fact that Germany has signed the lithium agreement with Serbia, going not against just the values that it has been promoting in the region, but against the values that it has been promoting by itself, you know, starting from environment, democracy, because obviously there is cooperation with a government which is quite problematic, like the Vucic's agreement regime. The third problem that is, you know, hindering the readiness of the Western Balkans, but also the EU project in enlarging towards Western Balkans, is politicization. Back in the days, we used to call to basically want the process to be more politicized. Why? Because we wanted more countries, more member states to have this political will which would push the Brussels motor in working in the enlargement process. What happened is the other way around. Basically, we had politicization of Orban style, which basically pushed for enlargement, because obviously, if you look at, you know, the stance towards enlargement towards Western Balkans, it is a Central Eastern European countries, mainly Poland and Hungary, pushing for enlargement. But this was mainly, you know, driven by the fact that these countries wanted to bring more autocrats on board, to challenge the decision making within the EU, rather than to democratize the region and have a bigger, healthier, and better Europe, as we heard in the keynote speech. And then the second politicization, which was very, very detrimental for the Western Balkans, it was the blocking countries. We had Greece and Macedonia, North Macedonia, then we had Bulgaria and North Macedonia, then we have Serbia with Kosovo, then we might have Greece and Albania, or potentially Croatia with Serbia. So politicization has been part of the enlargement process, but negatively. It wasn't the other way around. We never saw politicization positively, in which the member states that are actually pushing for, you know, reforms and democratization, such as Germany, because once, you know, Germany was heralding values and rule of law. France, to some extent, even the Netherlands, to actually bring this politicization on board, but positively. So this is not the case, and this is what has been hindering. So what we have now, if you ask the EU, enlargement is going on, right? It's working perfectly because there is a new enlargement methodology. There are some chapters which countries are potentially opening or closing. We don't even know what is going on. But in terms of quality of democracy, we don't see that. So it is completely two different universes. It's like when you live in the Western Balkans and you see the quality of democracy, it is, and when we hear the European Union statements, it's like we don't live in the same world. What the EU heralded was that after the Ukraine, the Russian aggression in Ukraine, there will be new impetus to enlargement. This is what you will hear. But where is that? We are even facing Ukraine fatigue now. So even what we thought that is going to be an enlargement success in a way, it is not going as well as we expected. So this is the problems, the structural problems that are from the EU side, the willingness to enlarge, and is it really the EU working actively to enlarge, like based on the rules of Copenhagen criteria that was mentioning, or are we just having a pretend game? And when we have a pretend game, we have Western Balkans elites, which are perfect in pretending. They pretend to do the reforms, they pretend to be pro-European, but most of the problems that we have in the region by political elites are by elites that are claiming to be pro-democratic, pro-West, but they offer themselves to Russia, to China, and name it, whatever third party that they can find to challenge the West.
Thank you very much. I mean, you want to scare us off from the enlargement, I perceive, because we have to sell it to the European public, that enlargement not only means becoming bigger, but at least remaining democratic. Exactly. And so we come back to this. Yeah.
We will definitely come back to this.
Definitely. Péter, Balázs, you're an academic, and as we heard, but also you have been former Minister for External Affairs. And Hungary is in so far in many ways interesting as It was an accession country 20-something years ago. It is now a member of the European Union, and it is perceived as a illiberal or self-described illiberal democracy. So when I heard Donika's words, I would say, how even believe it with this enlargement? Or what would you say, how can we preserve the European Union or the democratic values while enlarging? Or is this a contradiction that doesn't work?
Okay, well, in fact, Hungary is the country of origin of illiberal democracy, in quotation marks. I remember a visit of the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. She came to Hungary several years ago, and they had a joint press conference with Viktor Orban. And the journalist put the question to Angela Merkel, what's your feeling about illiberal democracy? And she said, I cannot couple those two words. The countries are either illiberal or democratic, but not the two at the same time. Orban introduced that concept exactly 10 years ago in one of his public speeches, but he is building his illiberal regime. He has been building this regime since 14 years now. And the outcome, the result is that if Hungary applied today for EU membership, she wouldn't be admitted at all, because we are not complying with several conditions. Of course, the investigation of compliance with the acquis communautaire is multifold, and the illiberalism does not concern all the chapters, because it has nothing to do with consumer protection or the noise level of airports or the arsenic content of drinking water and many other issues we were working in our accession process. So nothing to do with technicalities, but a lot to do with political conditions, with the constitutional structure of the country, with the functioning of democracy. So it would be a very serious obstacle. We have basically in Article 49 of the Basic Treaty, we have two basic conditions. One is European countries. This is easy to define. And full compliance with the rules of the club. And illiberalism is a diversion from the rules of the club. So in some cases, President Vucic is a close friend of Mr. Orban, so he is following him. But the problem for us, 20 years after EU accession, is that EU membership was a useful and necessary, but not an absolute condition for maintaining and anchoring democracy. It was our hope after the systemic change that with EU membership we will stabilize the new regime forever. It hasn't been the case, because it can be changed internally within the European Union. Hungary is a textbook example. Poland is a very good example for the possibility of changing back, returning to democracy. And I'm following closely the developments in Slovakia today and in several other countries.
Thank you very much. I mean, there has been a long complaint about that in the accession process, lots of criteria have been applied. But once a country is in the EU, there are little means to keep them on track. But if now under the given situation, I think that's not a motivation to let other countries in that already are obviously visible, not complying with the acquis communautaire. But we will ask our colleague from the European Parliament after that. To Nguyen, you are director of the Jacques Delors Center, and interestingly, you have been appointed by the German government to the Franco-German expert group on the EU institutional reforms, which is something. It's not only that the accession countries have to comply with certain rules, but the EU has to change too. So I would like to hear your take on what would you recommend that enlargement is possible, and at the same time we can preserve democracy in the Union?
Yes, so thank you very much also for me for the invitation. Coincidentally, our report came out almost exactly 1 year ago. So yesterday, 1 year ago, someone just wrote to me, and we really looked at the question, how can the EU institutionally prepare for enlargement, and what reforms do we think are necessary for the EU to become a union of more than 27, of 30, 36 member states. And this is actually also part of the Copenhagen criteria, right? So it's not just about candidate countries being ready to join the EU, but also the EU needs to be ready to absorb new member states. So it's called absorption capacity, or it's, and I think there's a lot of different discussions. So we had some are more technical, the number of MEPs in the parliament, perhaps the number of commissioners. So this is not very technical, but also has practical implications. But I think the three largest areas that I would see and that also come up in the discussions over and over again are the rule of law, capacity to act, and the budget. So on the rule of law, we have heard it already. There's of course this fear that once we let new members in and do not have the necessary rules in place, that there would be a second Hungary, in fact. Right? So there is this Hungarization of the discussion on enlargement. How can we prevent member states that enter the EU to slide away from rule of law standards? How can we improve the instruments that we have to ensure that rule of law and democracy standards are adhered to once member states are inside the EU and not just in the accession process? The second one is the question of capacity to act. And this really relates to the question, how does the EU take decisions? Right? And a lot of it has to do with the question of unanimity. We already have a problem often with the EU's capacity to act. It often takes much longer than we would need or we would want decisions to be taken. Often decisions are being blocked by one member state. And if we have these problems with 27 member states, then the likelihood of having them with more member states is much larger. Of course, this is a very, very sensitive topic, particularly for smaller member states that fear they would lose their voice, or that they would be overvoted by larger member states. So I think this is also an area where there's a lot of gray zone. So if I'm talking about capacity to act or decision making, it does not mean necessarily introducing QMV, but it is more the question of how can we reduce unanimity and reduce the risk of being blocked by individual member states, even when it does not necessarily relate to the decision at hand, but rather because they want to extract concessions in other areas. And the last very big block I think that needs to be looked at is the budget. And this partially relates to enlargement. All of these issues partially relate to enlargement. All of these issues are issues that we already have in the European Union, but there's a risk that they will be compounded once we become bigger, right? And with the budget, we have had all of these reports this year, letter report, Draghi report, that talk about the need for more investment. At the same time, we have the Next Generation EU fund that will run out in 1.5 years, in less than 1.5 years. And that needs to be repaid very, very soon. And we then have, of course, the question of the costs of enlargement itself that then comes on top of it. So all of this sort of necessitates a question of how do we want to reform the budget? How can we ensure that the needs are being met, while at the same time seeing that there's very little appetite on the sides of the member states to, in fact, pay more into the budget, right? And I think this is also because we're talking about challenges and opportunities, and I think this is also the challenge for the future of Europe, both in light and not in light of EU enlargement, is how do we get all of these reforms, whether it comes to institutional reforms, policy reforms, budget reforms, in place? How do we get enlargement on track in this next Commission and parliamentary term, when there seems to be less and less appetite on member states' side, and also less leadership on the member states' side in all of these issues, right? So we have two big member states, the Franco-German engine, that is really not working. We have a French government that is not in place yet, still. We have a German government that is very inward-looking and very occupied by domestic issues. Of course, there's a Polish presidency coming up, but even then, we will still need some sort of member state leadership to get all of these reforms and discussions and enlargement happening. And I think this is where I would see probably the biggest challenge is where will the leadership come in for all of this.
So I understand the recommendations of the expert group as managing the EU in a better way. There is little gain if there is no leadership, as you just said. Yet now on the concrete situation or question, it may be that in 2025 Western Balkan countries are joining the EU. What does it mean then for the European Union? Is happening was my neighbor said it's getting worse. We get more so-called. I'm with you. Liberal democracy is a non-word, but how can you concretely recommend a way that the Western Balkan states can join and the European Union can maintain its democracy in place?
Did you say 2025? 35?
Yeah, that's many people hope that. Maybe it doesn't happen. I mean, the accession process is prolonged for many years. So, but if we stay in the situation we are always talking about enlargement, and it doesn't happen. So that doesn't help us either. Okay, we refer to the parliament. Sergey Lagodinsky is member of the European Parliament, and he has been MEP since 2019 and is vice chair of the Green European Free Alliance. And amongst other things, he's serving at the Committee on Foreign Affairs and Legal Affairs. Sergey, help us out here. Give us a little overview about the Parliament's mood now, since the new composition of the European Parliament. What is the mood vis-à-vis enlargement, and what is your take on the discussion we just had? Can the European Parliament help to enlarge the European Union while preserving democracy and rule of law in the Union?
Nice to be here, and thanks for inviting me. Great to see you, Klaus, and great to see everyone. Greetings from Strasbourg. Well, I think generally, and this has nothing to do with elections, I would say that there is a revival of enlargement as an instrument of our foreign and European policies. And the reason for it is, of course, what's going on east of us. And the reason of it is also what was mentioned on the panel before at the beginning, and what is an ambivalent development. And this is the geopolitization of the European Union. This has various reasons. This has also one reason that I have been criticizing for the past, 3-4 years. The fact that Germany did not take an active role at the beginning of the war of aggression, of this new wave of the war of aggression against Ukraine, and Eastern European countries and Baltic countries, Central European countries have played a major role and have become a moral core of the European Union, which I think per se is a good thing. However, there is a difference. These countries look at the European Union, and this is maybe a little bit of a simplification, but the tendency is probably this. They look at this through the prism of a geopolitical confrontation, and this is the geopolitical and geographical fact for these countries. This is a historical fact for these countries, and this is part of the identity of European identity of these countries. So I don't think anyone should be blamed for this, but there is a shift. And the question is, what do we want to do with this shift? I think we should first celebrate this shift, because European Union, and that's why von der Leyen was right in saying that her first commission, von der Leyen 1, would be a geopolitical commission. Well, this union has become a geopolitical union during the past years. And from that perspective, the European Parliament is also joining forces, and the look and the outlook is now towards the east and not towards the south of the European Union. At least this is what the main vibe in this parliament is. So we were pushing actively to advance the cause of Ukrainian membership plans. We were pushing actively on Moldova, and we were pushing until recently actively on Georgia, and there we will have to see what we're going to do with that. Maybe after the October election, there will be a new understanding of how to deal with Georgia. Now we have new candidates, something that people don't speak very often about outside of this parliament and of the EU institutions. We have Armenia, a country that wants to free itself from the very fatal relationship with Russia, historical relationship with Russia, which is threatened by Azerbaijan and also sometimes not openly, but by Turkey, and which is also, at least, whose leadership has decided it wants the trajectory that Moldova, Georgia, and also Ukraine took. They want a trajectory towards European Union. Another case to think about membership. These are very often geostrategical decisions, but these are decisions also guided by our values, and this balance must be kept. I would warn everyone to look only at new members as problematic members in terms of values and rule of law. Let's look at the situation in Italy, a founding member of the European Union. So it's not just a matter of accession. It's a matter of the state of our rule of law and democracy in general. And maybe we should think about this independently, these two questions, because they are very often linked, because of course we see it we look at newer, more fresher member states. I mean, what is new? 20 years, it's not new anymore. But the fact is that we have a general rule of law and democracy problem, and this we will need to address also within the debate on reforms of the European Union. But it doesn't mean that we should hesitate to open towards Ukraine and towards other countries. There are technical issues, and they will be open. There are issues of unanimity of this decision. And this unanimity we will not be able to avoid of the decision of accession, because this is a treaty. It's still a treaty. And we would need every member of the treaty to decide with whom they want to be together in a union. And there we will have a lot of questions, not only from usual suspects, but also from countries like Poland, regardless of their government, regarding the agricultural situation, and of many other countries who, for various reasons, will have their questions, also security questions, when we will be talking about the membership of Ukraine. I don't think that Moldova is a big problem. In Moldova, we have a large share of population already now who have European passports because of Romania's policy to grant European passports to Moldovans. But the country like Ukraine, this will be a big project, and we should start this project. I know that our Ukrainian friends are eager already now to open the fundamentals chapter, and I think this could be also a useful vehicle also to look into the domestic policies and rule of law in Ukraine, something that, of course, during the war you cannot do, but you can do it if it's an accession country. This is something that I also advocated, having been chair of EU-Turkey delegation, also vis-a-vis Turkey, not stopping the accession process, but using accession process also to have a say on domestic and democratic situation there. So how did this change with the new elections? I don't think it changed. Of course, we have a larger share of right-wing parties, of pro-Russian parties, but they are not the majority. The majority is still pro-accession or open towards accession, and this spirit will remain. The Council is going to be the problem, because we are seeing as like one after other countries are switching towards a right wing or going to the pro-Russian left wing. And that will be the deadlock, not the parliament. I don't think the parliament will be.
Thank you very much. You want to react on that?
Well, I mean, the parliament was never the problem. But then the question is, who actually listens to the parliament, to the resolutions that derive from the parliament? And, you know, like when I worked in Paris for Brussels, the question was, okay, so who you can talk to? You can talk to parliamentarians. But then the level of difficulty, like who is a gamer? You understand, the next level. The next level is the council, and then the commission, and then there is a council. And in the council, you can have all the processes, and they are blocked by the member states. So it's the structural problems within the EU that have to be addressed. Which brings me to the point that, you know, I completely agree. The capacity to absorb. We have all these problems with enlargement because there is the limit. The capacity to absorb has reached a limit which the EU doesn't know how to address. Is it because of the German-French machinery not working properly and not steering the EU to a union that is at least functional? Then it could be that. It could be the lack of leadership. It could be the lack of plan. How do we move from here? Because you see the Germans are still pushing for an economic union, hoping that the invisible hand of economy is going to fix all our problems. This is, you know, this was also the case with Western Balkans, hoping that you throw money to your problems and you will cover it with money, and then, you know, when the money goes away, the problem goes away with it. It is not the case. This is a case with also, you know, then what does France want, you know? For us, it's a very mixed message. Without you understanding what kind of the EU you want to have and bringing us on board in that discussion, there is no way that we are going to build something that is structural, that is going to be sustainable. Because then France, there is the idea of core, periphery, European political community, all kinds of debates that derive from France, which are half-baked, and not even France actually goes along with it. And then the second issue is enlargement. It is not, I mean, 2025, 2035, we would still be talking about the same issue if the EU is going to move in the direction that is moving now, or at the pace that is moving now. Because in addition to the reforms that within the EU need to be done in order to increase this capacity to absorb, then there is, you know, what kind of enlargement do we want? Because, you know, if you have been following the enlargement debates lately, it's never about enlargement as we used to see in the previous waves. Now we are talking about economic enlargement. Now we are talking about staged accession. Now we are talking about phased accession. We are talking all kinds of accession, but not an enlargement that we used to see before. Because, and then we are happy with whatever the EU offers. That's why we are happy with the growth plan. But the growth plan is not fresh money, it's the money that has been there. It has been there like, you know, before. But if you don't have a sustainable system that absorbs this money, it is going to subsidize Vučić and autocrats. You know, like we basically are subsidizing autocrats with EU money. So we have to be blunt about it, and this, you know, this is the only way that we actually stop. I mean, I know that we scare the EU with these kind of discussions, but I had this discussion 10 years ago when I was working in Paris, and it hasn't changed since then. So, you know, unless we talk about it and we name the problem, then we can't fix the problem. So, you know, that is the second one. The EU was too ambitious when it launched itself in the Western Balkans, believing that what worked in the Central Eastern European countries, it would work in the Western Balkans too. So basically, with the tools to build a bike, they tried to build a plane. And the worst thing is that they didn't build the plane before taking off, they actually built it while flying. And it fell apart. So we can introduce new documents. The EU loves regulations, you know. But, you know, the enlargement methodology changed. What has it changed since 2020? 4 years. Read the reports about the level of democracy, the quality of democracy in the region, and then you will find out if it works or if it worked or not. And then, you know, like there are like debates about this staged accession, which the EU took from the Western Balkans in a way, and now they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to introduce it. They don't know how to implement it, but it's just there. And if you see the way that the enlargement portfolio has been even distributed, you can see that actually no EU member states want to deal with enlargement because it's such a difficult portfolio. They would rather deal with fisheries, oceans, or whatever, but not with enlargement. Because then you will have to not only fight for regions which, basically with member states lacking appetite for obvious reasons, but also you have to confront the countries that are blocking in a malicious way, blocking because it's simply not in their agenda, or the countries that are constantly skeptic about EU enlargement, and you constantly have to convince and to fight for it in Brussels. So these are the problems that the EU should look at, and then it's a vicious cycle. From the point of view of the Western Balkans, I do agree. We have no appetite for reforms. Our leaders call reforms painful. Because it's painful. It's painful for an autocrat to become a democratic leader, right? So if the process of the EU kind of, puts them in this trajectory, it is painful, but it's not painful for the citizens of Kosovo or the Western Balkans. And the third point is, what scares me the most is that the hope was there for Turkey. Where is Turkey now? When the EU talks about Black Sea, it actively excludes Turkey. The role of Turkey in the Black Sea? The EU pretends it's not there. And soon it will pretend Georgia is not there because, the government is problematic, and then juggle between Moldova and Ukraine. The second phase was Western Balkan hope, which was in 2003. And if you talk to people in 2003, many say that the next day after Thessaloniki summit, there was no appetite and no one took it seriously. And the third one now is with Ukraine. Ukraine has 44 million inhabitants. It is way bigger than the entire Western Balkan regions. It's quite problematic, is it? Or we don't know how the country is going to look like after this. With the EU launching this, okay, this is my card, I give you the geopolitical membership card, and not then work on it actively to deliberately not only deliver, but work with the government to actually make the reforms happen, there is going to be disappointment.
I hate to interrupt you, but Sergey Lagodinsky has to leave in a couple of minutes, so I would like to give him the chance to react on this. Sergey, I completely join the geopolitical arguments on stabilizing Eastern Europe, also with the promise to further or sooner or later an accession to the European Union. How long can we credibly keep up this kind of promise, given all the obstacles you just have heard? How can we think this together?
Well, it depends on how clever we can do and steer this strategically. And I don't even know if I should say anything, since Donika said that we are irrelevant in this in this process. I don't think this is useful to go like this, to go with the European Union and European Parliament like this. We are an important also platform for debates, because you're saying that debates are important and we should bring them to a different level. Well, European Parliament is, for example, a place to bring them to a different level. We do have a say on the accession treaty. Without a yes from the European Parliament, there cannot happen an accession. And we do have a say also on funds, on IPA funds, and on distribution of funds and reforms, on our agricultural policy, etc., etc. So I wouldn't dismiss European Parliament. I know that this is a popular opinion of many who are doing foreign policy, but European Parliament is not just foreign policy. We are a regulatory power. And a pain in the ass to many. So, but just to finish, Klaus, on you, because you want to intervene and to tell me that I should go back home. No.
Get a note that you have to leave at 4:50. So if you stay with us, that's fine.
No. But what I wanted to say, yes, there is a conundrum, but this conundrum is there. every wave of accession and enlargement changes European Union. It's not like European Union is just getting larger and larger and stays the same. It changed with Eastern accession of Eastern neighbors, and it will change with an accession of Balkan countries or with accessions of Ukraine. Turkey, I don't think this is realistic in the near future, but we should still not write it off. And of course, a larger European Union is totally different in its fabric than a small Western, cozy Western European liberal democratic union. This will be, our world is changing. So let's be more open towards those processes instead of trying to preserve the world that we are used to or have been used to for the past 50 years.
Thank you very much. I join you in that the European Parliament is a very important actor. Just a word on the Commission. We have a new European Commission, and can you assess already where they stand, the new Commission stands in this question?
It's very early to assess. We have an enlargement portfolio that was taken away from Hungary. Sorry, Hungary, but I think Oliver Varhelyi was not the least controversial commissioner, and he was, well, I'm not sure punished. I mean, animal welfare is something that is close to my green heart, but it's quite a change, a topical change. Slovenia and Slovenian government is not an easy partner either. I have many questions to Slovenian government, for example, regarding their policy vis-a-vis Eastern Europe and vis-a-vis Russia. But we will look into the new candidate. Our process is starting in 2 weeks in my legal affairs committee, where we will look at conflict of interest, and then it will go to other committees. For now, we cannot say much about that, but generally the fact that this portfolio is no more in the hands of Hungary shows also that geopolitics also have changed, and it is not possible anymore to have that type of conflict of interest that it would be if Oliver Varhelyi stayed responsible for this.
Thank you very much. Does anybody of you want to react on this?
I wanted to perhaps say something on the seriousness of the EU and the member states on enlargement. I think there has been a notable shift when it comes to the stance of member states on enlargement, of course, especially in France. And I think the discussions that we are seeing on absorption capacity, on reforms, on different ways to perhaps integrate new candidate countries, new member states before full membership, is a signal that the EU is taken seriously, because they're really thinking about it. They're thinking about different ways. They're thinking about how to prepare the EU. And I know that there's some skepticism also on the debate on reforming the EU, whether or not that is simply a means to delay accession. But I think it is actually a sign of the EU seriously engaging with the question, what would happen if or when enlargement happens, because now it is a question of when, and how can we best make sure that it will be a success. So I think there actually has been a shift in the enlargement debate, and I think there's a seriousness to it also when you look at what is coming now from the Commission soon on the pre-enlargement policy reviews, the debates that we had at least a year ago on how to prepare the EU. I think this can also be taken actually as a sign that it is a serious discussion in the member states.
Thank you. Péter, Balázs.
Yes, I think Sergey told something very important, that the EU has changed with each and every enlargement. So it has never been the same after the accession of new countries. And this is a very important point, because the EU has started with 6 members, and it has grown like a teenage boy who was wearing small size clothes. And today that boy is XXL, and we are still putting on S trousers, because our institutions have not changed. We are working on the same basis. And it is not only the growth of the number of member states from 6 to 27 today, but the enlargement of the activities. They have started originally with 3 common policies: trade, agriculture, and transport. Today, we have, by any approach, about 20 sectors where we are doing something in common. And there is a third dimension of growth. This is competencies. At the origin, there were member state competencies and community competencies. And after we had mixed, we have the open method of coordinations, we have at least 5 different levels of competencies. So if you put it together, you get a fantastic Rubik's Cube, 27 member states, 20 sectors, and 5 levels of competence. It is too big. It is too big, so before any enlargement, there should be a fundamental reform, because otherwise we couldn't continue. This was the intention of the European Constitution of the convention. I used to be a member of that convention many years ago, and our dream was to introduce reforms. Already the candidates were invited before enlargement takes place, but it didn't happen. So we have also forgotten there is a provision in the treaty that the number of the commissioners should be reduced to 2/3 of the number of member states by 2014. 2014 was the deadline, and there was a silent decision, an almost secret decision of the European Council to postpone that date sine die, so there is no new target date. We have pushed it to the background, and 2 days ago, Ursula von der Leyen announced again a commission of 27 members.
Just a brief intervention. I have been misunderstood. I said that the only institution we could actually talk to was the parliament. So we called it the most normal one. The one that was actually listening, was touching base, was, you know, having resolutions, and was pushing for policies, especially enlargement policies in the Western Balkans. MEPs are extremely active, and they listen and they connect with us in the best possible way. Hence brings, you know, my point of the need to reform, because whatever the parliament or even the commission does, it was extremely problematic when we dealt with member states. And that's why I said the council was the biggest problem, because of the member states blocking the decision-making process. We talked a lot about the QMV and the need to reform the voting process and everything, which obviously it is very problematic and it can't happen. For me, my biggest disappointment would be rather the machine, Germany, France, and, you know, in the Western Balkans, I think the Netherlands played a very crucial role, because they were always the one who were basically pain in the ass. The ones who were like, we are not going to allow anything that violates rule of law and our conditionality go through. So sometimes it would be silent, not to block process, but be vocal. So for me, this machinery that pushes for democratization, rule of law, if it's not functioning, then we will have an enlargement. There is ticking the boxes process. The Brussels will work, but we're not going to see any kind of improvement.
I think we got the message, yeah. There are room, I get assigned for 1 or 2 questions there, and there I'm coming out of a quoted organization. Are there no women? If not, yeah.
Hello, my name is Murat Somer. I'm a professor of political science at Özyeğin University in Istanbul. I'm glad that you raised the question of Turkey in the second half of the panel, because I think, in my opinion, if there is one country that would really shift the geopolitical weight of the European Union, but I would also say that the democratic image, democratic weight of European Union in the world, that's actually Turkey. And it is, I'm not sure if the EU is really has a geopolitical or democratic vision to see things that way, but I do think that way. And it is not practical right now, I think, for Turkey to have access to European Union, mostly because it is not practically a democratic country. But I would also say, however, Turkey is actually has had perhaps the strongest pro-democratic opposition and resistance to democratic erosion during the last 2 decades. It has much more democratic reflex and heritage than many other countries that are also in the same process. So my question is, there may be a shift of power in Turkey foreseeably in a few years. If that happens, then what would be the lessons to be learned from the failure of this process in the early 2000s when everybody was talking about possible, I don't know, sincerely or not, I don't know, but when it was, the process was alive, what are the lessons to be taken from that period so that it will not happen again?
Thank you very much. There was another question. I think we just admit another question, and then we have a round of answers, and I fear that then we have to come to an end.
No, thank you very much.
Without having solved all the problems. Please, yeah.
It will be tough to solve all the problems of the enlargement panel. Luka Palcher here from the Slovenian embassy. Just a few remarks. It's not a question, but I felt that we had to maybe reframe some things. First of all, well, it would be a pleasure to talk to our colleague from the European Parliament if he was still here. He said that it would, that he would have some questions to the Slovenian government regarding our Russian policy. I would be eager to ask him what he meant by that. The Slovenian government has a very pro-Ukrainian stance when it comes to the war and aggression, and one of the few governments actually in Europe which has no double standards when it comes to the war aggression from Russia to Ukraine, and then when Israel and Palestine. Second, you mentioned, dear colleague from Kosovo, if I'm not mistaken, that no one is excited to have the enlargement portfolio. I'd have to say that Slovenia is very excited to have the enlargement portfolio, and we are looking forward to taking this challenge on. I don't know if you know, but in Bled last year it was the Bled 2030 pledge given, which from Charles Michel, saying basically the enlargement will happen by that year. This is also very hopeful, but nevertheless, I think that our candidate for the Commission, Marta Kos, is more than capable of providing her expertise and leadership in this manner. And thirdly, I think this is something that giving the enlargement portfolio to Slovenia is also a recognition of Slovenia's importance when it comes to sharing expertise, knowledge within the Western Balkans. To not say that the Western Balkans is now, we're moving towards the trio in the East. I think Europe should be very keen on giving the importance to the Western Balkans, same as to Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia in this sense. So this would be a few remarks, and I'm welcome to...
Thank you very much. I didn't get really the question, but maybe that's just
because
a statement.
There was none.
Okay, thank you very much. So what leaves is Turkey, and you know we have a long history in debating Turkey. Anybody appetite to answer the question? Please go.
Yeah, I'd like to react to the question on Turkey. Turkey is an extremely important partner of the EU, and the EU has missed the opportunity to find an appropriate solution for Turkey. It was sometimes by the end of the last century when Turkey applied in '87, and they were waiting patiently 12 years until in '99 the EU gave a positive answer. Yes, you are a candidate. It was a very long time. And there was still an opportunity to find something, because which are the main arguments against Turkey? One is the budget. I don't think it would be a serious obstacle, because there is money in the EU if we find the right keywords or under the pressure of the COVID pandemic. We could increase the EU budget by 75% immediately. And there is now the plan of Draghi on the table, suggesting, again, roughly doubling the EU budget if the member states agree. Islam is not a real problem with Turkey, because Islam is already in Europe. Let's make a clear difference between extremists and terrorists and the traditional Islam culture. So these are two different things. One of the main problems is the jealousy of big member states, because just imagine, today there are 6 bigs in the EU, and you can always feel the difference between smaller and the 6 big countries, and that would be a number 7, Turkey, with a growing population tending towards 80 million, size of Germany, and having a strong voice in the decision making. You have mentioned the German-French axis. Yes, Poland matters as well, Italy matters, Spain matters, but Turkey would matter as well. So it would be a difficult point, but the political strategy should be that Turkey should be on our side and not with our enemies or other countries in the region. So it would be very, very difficult. We should have a lot of imagination in order to find the appropriate treatment. It is not the schoolmaster-like behavior of EU that just learn the acquis communautaire, possibly in French, and then you can come back to pass the exam.
Very many thanks for this positive note at the end, though I think the enlargement will be a topic for the next forum too. So thank you very much for your contributions. We have to come to an end, and all for your insights, and I think we keep the topic on the agenda for the coming years so far. Thank you very much for your patience and for your interest here.